Good morning. For today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is now pressing President Biden to build back Trump's border wall. That's shortly after the human smuggling tragedy this week. He also says more truck checkpoints will be set up on highways.
New York pushes to stop the sale of ghost guns. City and state officials sue 10 distributors of untraceable gun components.
Hear the inspiring story behind the Boys with a Purpose organization. We speak to the founder, who provides young boys with a father figure.
NATO leaders met in the Spanish capital. One of the topics of the summit is addressing China's growing influence and its impact on NATO allies and partners. Good morning. Welcome to NTD Daybreak. I'm Kevin Hogan.
Good morning, and I'm Evelyn Lee. It's Thursday, June 30th. We start with some updates on the harrowing illegal immigrant deaths in Texas. 4 men have been charged, and just in case you missed it, on Monday, authorities found an abandoned truck in San Antonio with 46 dead bodies inside. There were 16 survivors, but too weak to get out on their own. Some of the survivors passed away in the hospital. The death count is now up to 53. Mexican immigration officials say the American truck driver tried to slip away by pretending to be one of the victims. The driver was charged with smuggling resulting in death. Another American citizen is accused of conspiracy. He allegedly was in touch with the driver about transporting the migrants. 2 other men who are not U.S. citizens were also arrested, but on charges of illegal weapons possession. Prosecutors say the men were found at a San Antonio address where the truck was registered. And in response to the tragedy, Texas Governor Greg Abbott now says state troopers will set up more truck checkpoints on highways. He did not say how many or how many trucks would be stopped, but apparently they won't be placed at points of entry. He also didn't say where exactly the points will be to surprise the smugglers. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg tells us more.
The Texas governor blames the Biden administration for the loss of lives. He said on Twitter, "These deaths are on Biden. They are a result of his deadly open border policies. They show the deadly consequences of his refusal to enforce the law." Mexico joined the investigation into the deaths of the suspected illegal immigrants. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador echoed the Texas governor's comments.
It happens because there is also human trafficking and lack of control at the border between Mexico and the United States and inside the United States.
Abbott says the Department of Public Safety will create and implement a checkpoint strategy beginning immediately. He says trucks like the one used in the tragedy will be targeted in an effort to stop human smuggling.
The Biden administration still is doing nothing whatsoever to stop it. Texas is going to take action to do our part to try to reduce the illegal immigration coming into our country.
Abbott says the current measures would be unnecessary if President Biden had kept the border security plan from the former administration in place.
Under President Trump, we saw the fewest illegal crossings in decades. Under President Biden, we see all-time record highs. It's time for President Biden to reinstate the strategies that were put in place by President Trump that proved so effective.
Specifically, Abbott says the Trump strategies include building a border wall, keeping in place and enforcing Title 42 and the Remain in Mexico policy, and ending catch and release.
But maybe there's a fifth thing, candidly, that means as much as anything else, and that is for the president to be adamant that he is not going to tolerate any illegal immigration.
Homeland Security investigators believe the illegal immigrants boarded the truck on U.S. soil near or in Laredo, Texas. Mexican officials say the truck went through a Border Patrol checkpoint northeast of Laredo on Interstate 35 on Monday. The truck was registered in Alamo, Texas, but had fake plates and logos, made to look like a truck from a South Texas company. Officials in Mexico released a surveillance photo showing the driver smiling at the checkpoint bound for San Antonio. It's unclear if the people were in the trailer when it passed the checkpoint. The checkpoints will be different than the mandates used in April, when all commercial vehicles entering from Mexico were checked by state police. That order was lifted by Abbott after having a negative impact on trade with Mexico. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
New York State and New York City officials are cracking down on ghost guns. City and state officials are suing 10 distributors of gun components to stop the sale of untraceable weapons. In separate lawsuits on Wednesday, the companies were accused of creating a public nuisance by selling unfinished gun frames and receivers. Here's what New York officials had to say.
Gun violence is impacting New Yorkers every day. It claims lives. And ghost guns don't discriminate.
We are not going to let gun companies turn New York into a city of mail-ordered murder. With just a few clicks and a credit card, undercover investigators in the sheriff's office, and the sheriff is here with us today, were able to order the components and use them to assemble guns that are illegal under city and state law.
They say purchasers who might be ineligible to buy ordinary weapons can assemble the components into complete firearms. Ghost guns have no serial numbers and parts can be acquired without background checks. City officials say gun arrests are at a 28-year high. New York City police recovered 175 ghost guns in arrests so far this year. Last year, in total, 263 ghost guns were recovered. The Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday that Oklahoma can prosecute non-Native Americans for crimes committed on tribal land when the victim is Native American. The ruling narrows the 2020 decision of McGritt v. Oklahoma that says crimes committed on reservations by Native Americans cannot be prosecuted by state or local law enforcement. These cases were prosecuted by tribal and federal courts, but in a 5-4 decision authored by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the court ruled in favor of Oklahoma in its bid to prosecute a non-Native American convicted of a crime committed against a Native American child on the Cherokee Nation reservation. The man was convicted in state court and sentenced to 35 years in prison for neglecting his disabled stepdaughter, a Native American child, who has a disorder that affects muscle coordination. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals threw out that conviction last year because of the previous precedent.
Justice Kavanaugh also clarified that Native American country within a state's territory is part of a state, not separate from a state.
He also says that under the Constitution and the court's precedents, the default is that states may exercise criminal jurisdiction within their territory.
This ruling could also be extended to other states.
States could now look for new authority and jurisdiction over crimes committed against Native Americans on reservations by non-Native Americans.
Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer announced that he'll step down from the nation's highest court today. President Biden's appointee, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, will be the one replacing him. Breyer told Biden in a letter Wednesday that his retirement from the Supreme Court will be effective today, June 30th at noon. The Supreme Court will hand down all remaining opinions ready during this term. The justice wrote, "It has been my great honor to participate as a judge in the effort to maintain our Constitution and the rule of law." Breyer was appointed by former President Bill Clinton and has served on the High Court since 1994.
Former President Donald Trump was cleared of contempt of court by a judge on Wednesday. Trump was ordered to pay $10,000 a day until he complied with a subpoena for personal finance documents. The subpoena was issued by New York Attorney General Letitia James in December. Trump paid $110,000 in fines, which won't be released until certain conditions are met while he appeals the original contempt filing. The New York Supreme Court judge lifted the contempt order after reviewing recent additional submissions from Trump's legal team. The judge also says James agreed that the newly submitted documents were sufficient to lift the order. An attorney for Trump stated that although they are pleased with the court lifting the contempt finding, it was unwarranted and improper in the first place, saying they will push ahead with the appeal to secure justice. R. Kelly was sentenced on Wednesday to 30 years in prison. The multi-platinum R&B singer was convicted for racketeering and sex crimes. He is accused of exploiting his stardom and wealth over decades to lure women and underage girls into his orbit for sex.
R. Kelly is a predator.
R&B singer R. Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison for sexual abuse, marking the end of a sordid, stunning fall for the multi-platinum artist, who at 55 could spend the rest of his life behind bars. The sentence was imposed 9 months after Kelly was convicted of racketeering and sex crimes, which included luring women and underage girls into his orbit for sex. Federal prosecutor Breon Peace.
With the aid of his fame, his money, and most importantly, his inner circle, R. Kelly preyed upon children and young women for his own sexual gratification for decades. He continued committing his crimes for almost 30 years and avoided punishment until today.
The sentencing came after several accusers, some of them tearful, told the judge about how Kelly promised to mentor them and help them attain stardom, only to subject them to degrading sexual treatment and physical harm. Lizette Martinez was among them.
Today was a very special but hard day for us. I personally, this happened to me a long time ago. I was 17, I'm 45 today. I never thought that I would be here to see him be held accountable for the atrocious things that he did to children.
Prosecutors had asked for more than 25 years, arguing he showed a callous disregard for his victims and showed no remorse. Kelly's lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, said the singer would appeal.
For us, it's just the beginning of the fight, frankly.
Kelly did not speak during Wednesday's hearing, but has repeatedly denied sexual abuse accusations. He will likely be transported soon to a jail in Chicago, where he faces an August trial in federal court on child pornography and obstruction charges. He also faces various state charges in Illinois and Minnesota.
Next is an organization that realizes the importance of father figures in boys' lives while growing up. For some that aren't fortunate enough to have that, Kenneth Joyner tries to make up for it. Let's look at a short clip first.
So when you go through something hard, something difficult, watch this, you gotta bounce back. Everybody say bounce back.
Bounce back.
Do you have to come from a certain area or family?
No.
No. Do you have to drive a certain car?
No.
Live in a certain house?
No.
You can learn anything that you put your mind to, guaranteed. And let me ask anybody this question real quick. How do we treat young ladies?
Respectfully.
Right? Respectfully, right? What else? Go ahead.
How you want to be treated.
How you want to be treated.
Joining me now on the program is Kenneth Joyner. He's the CEO of Boys with a Purpose. He also wrote a book called Without a Father. It's great to have you on the show, Kenneth.
Thank you for having me, Evelyn. I appreciate it.
Before we dive in, though, please tell us more about what you do at Boys with a Purpose and why you founded that organization in the first place.
It goes back to me, really, right? I grew up without my father, born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I realized the effect that had on me. And so from that, I just really wanted to always give back. We started mentoring in Baltimore in the D.C. area. And then when I transitioned here to Charleston, South Carolina, that's when we started Boys with a Purpose in 2016. And so we just really wanted to give these young men an opportunity to become the best version of themselves, right? Academically, socially, emotionally, culturally.
That's amazing. So please, would you share with us what kind of impact it can have on young men that, aren't fortunate enough to grow up with a father figure in their life? What kind of impact does it have?
It literally transforms your life. It literally transforms your life. You're on a different path when you have a mentor, when you have somebody that's there to be able to guide you. You can imagine, imagine a young man stepping to the plate to swing his first bat, right? But nobody tells him how to stand. Nobody tells him how to swing. Nobody tells him what a pitching zone is, right? And he doesn't recognize a curveball, fastball, or any kind of thing. So when you have a guidance, when you have somebody to come alongside you and help you, you swing better. You swing better at life. You swing better at your purpose. And that, again, changes your outcome. We've seen academic changes. We've seen social, emotional changes. We've seen kids who never had anybody graduate in their family be the first one. So we want to continue that work. I know I do. And again, no salary for this. This is my passion. This is my calling. And I'm going to do this until. And so we teach respect first foremost for self, and then respect for others, respect for authority, and obviously respect for women, because I come from a mom who raised 4 kids by herself. We actually celebrated her 72nd birthday on Sunday. So I come from a strength of all women 7 aunts. And so that strength was transferred to me, but there are some things that my mother couldn't teach me. She couldn't teach me how to be a man, right? And so that is what we transfer to these young men, right? What changed your life? It is not so much the people, it is the experiences that the people provided for you. So we try to get them out of their environment, and we try to put them in different experiences that really are going to shape them to say, you know what, I could be an engineer at Boeing. I could, work as a CEO at Volvo.
But just before we go, I want to know, are you in touch with some of those guys that graduated from the program, if you can call it that, and where are they now in life?
Oh, well, we just did a piece with some of the young men who went on the Steve Harvey show back in 2016. And so they are now 10th, 11th grade. They are doing phenomenal. We are wanting to partner with Boeing here in South Carolina, where Boeing will have them intern in the 11th grade, intern in the 12th grade. And then if they decide to stay with Boeing, then Boeing will pay for the 4-year, the master's, and the PhD. And so my goal is to put 1 million boys through college.
Wow, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time today and, of course, for what you do. Kenneth Joyner, Boys with a Purpose. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really have to say, I think this must be one of my favorite stories that we had so far. Kenneth also told me that with COVID and school closures, children basically went through an emotional war. So that's why right now we see more disrespectful behaviors and less engagement with teachers since they've been away from that setting for so long. He says parents and educators should definitely address that and that we can't be missing them socially, emotionally, or culturally.
What a great mission he took on. It seems like he's investing all his time without expecting anything in return.
I agree, yeah. Moving on to some other news, there are fresh signs of cost cutting at Tesla. The car maker has reportedly shut an office in California and laid off about 200 employees. Earlier this month, CEO Elon Musk said he had a, quote, super bad feeling about the U.S. economy. He said Tesla needed to cut staff numbers by about 10%. Later, he said that would mainly apply to salaried workers, but Reuters reports that most of those laid off were hourly workers. Apparently, workers were told that they would just move to a new location. Instead, they were let go. That's after the office in San Mateo, California, shut altogether. Many staffers there worked on helping to develop the autopilot software. Tesla didn't comment on the news.
And coming up, NATO leaders met in the Spanish capital this week. The summit addressed challenges NATO allies face over China's growing influence and its ties with Russia. NATO leaders met in Spain's capital, Madrid, on Wednesday. Leaders of 4 Pacific Rim countries were invited to the summit, with 2 of them attending for the first time. At the summit, China's growing influence was addressed, and leaders commented on the serious challenges it presents to the alliance. NTD's Contempt reports.
The comments came after NATO agreed to a new strategic concept that mentioned China for the first time. The 10-page document describes the country as a challenge to NATO's interests, security, and values.
China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors, and threatening Taiwan. Investing heavily in critical infrastructure, including in allied countries. Monitoring and controlling its own citizens through advanced technology.
China denies any such tactics. Stoltenberg added that a strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing and China's growing assertiveness have consequences for the security of NATO allies and partners. NATO says it will remain open to constructive engagement with China. Before the summit, U.S. Senator Tom Tillis, co-chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group, said on Washington Post,
"We have Pacific Rim countries coming because where there's an increasing acknowledgement to NATO that China is a threat, and to have them at the summit is historic."
Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand were invited to the summit. Leaders of the United States, South Korea, and Japan expressed deep concern over North Korea's missile tests. North Korea has been conducting missile tests at an unprecedented pace this year, and is believed by some to be preparing for another nuclear test. The South Korean and Japanese leaders are attending NATO's annual summit as observers for the first time. Ties between the two countries have long been strained by memories of Japan's occupation of the Korean peninsula from 1910 to 1945. The summit also saw Sweden and Finland being welcomed by its Nordic neighbors, following the recent invitation to join the NATO military alliance. Nordic leaders spoke of a historic event that would bring the countries closer. NATO's 30 allies also agreed to formally treat Russia as the most significant and direct threat to the allies' security. Ratification in allied parliaments is likely to take up to a year. Once it is done, Finland and Sweden will be covered by NATO's Article 5 collective defense clause, putting them under the United States' protective nuclear umbrella. Contempt, NTD News.
British entrepreneur Richard Branson visited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev yesterday. Branson also visited the Hostomel airport in the Kiev region and other sites of Russian attacks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Branson was willing to join the post-war reconstruction. Indonesia's President Joko Widodo visited him shortly before. Zelensky also says he is ready to open a new strategic direction with Asia. The Ukrainian president confirmed Ukraine carried out its biggest exchange of prisoners of war since Russia invaded. They secured the release of almost 150 soldiers.
Air New Zealand may soon be offering beds to economy class passengers. The airline has unveiled its Skynest idea, which has 6 full-size sleeping pods for travelers and its upcoming Boeing 787 Dreamliners. The planes are expected to make their debut in 2024. The pods will be stacked like bunk beds and come with features including a pillow, bedding, and a ventilation outlet. After each flight, the bedding will be changed. This could come in handy as Air New Zealand does have some of the lengthiest flights in the world. After this year, the carrier will start a non-stop flight from Auckland to New York with a flight time of 17 hours.
Sounds pretty cool. But speaking of transportation, does your long work commute leave you stressed? Well, imagine a flying boat ferry getting you to work in half the time. The Swedish startup says this battery-powered boat can do just that, cut commute times and cut emissions. The founder says he took inspiration from Tesla. Since its launch last August, Candela sold more than 100 of its fully electric zero-carbon hydrofoil boats. Hydrofoils are wing-like structures attached to the underside of a boat's hull to essentially lift the boat out of the water without creating wake. It makes boats faster this way and increases battery efficiency. Candela is now developing water taxis and small ferries, which can carry up to 30 passengers, and they're expected to hit the water in Stockholm as early as next year.
What if there was a way to remove weeds without harmful chemicals? Well, we're in luck. Goats to the rescue. Riverside Park in Manhattan is being visited by a new landscaping crew, a group of goats.
Ready, set, goats, and the hungry goats are off running. 20 goats from Green Goats Farm have been brought to Riverside Park in Manhattan to feast on their delicious weed infestation.
Just like the running of the bulls, we wanted to see them come out of the gate fast, which they did. They're a lot bigger than we thought, so that was really fun. And yeah, they just started working right away. So it's really fun to see wildlife like this in Riverside Park.
Goats are a chemical-free solution to the park's weed problem. They can also go where others cannot.
Well, have you looked at the slope? It's very steep. Plus the trees, you've got tree roots and such. You don't want to just destroy the trees. And it's just hard to access. It's very hard to access to try to come in there and pull this stuff by hand.
An original lawnmower, they mow down invasive species that stop soil-retaining plants from growing, which would otherwise be providing habitat for wildlife.
They love this stuff. They eat poison ivy, they eat the porcelain berry, they eat the multiflora rose, and that's what we're trying to get rid of.
While lawnmowers scatter seeds around, goats slow the spread of seeds.
The goats are great, and they're probably the only animal that don't poop out fertilized pellets. So they eat seeds and it's not replanted.
There is no doubt the goats are great for the park. But why have so many people come to see the goats eat?
I love their little tails. I love how they love to munch on things. They're cute.
Of the 20 goats brought to the park, 4 will remain to finish the job, totaling 2 acres of weeds. That's a big meal.
It really is a win-win. The park gets their weeds removed and the goats get an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah.
Evelyn, have you ever been to an all-you-can-eat buffet?
What? I did not expect this change of topic at all. But yes, of course I have. And I would say probably, all Chinese have been at one point or another.
Well, I used to wrestle in high school, and after cutting weight all week, we would go to Old Country Buffet and max out.
Oh, that sounds perfect after a wrestling match.
Yeah.
That's it for today's news. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Evelyn Lee.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.